London, 1835. The morning fog clung to Covent Garden like a gossiping matron's whispered secrets, and Lady Catherine Ashworth wished she could disappear into it entirely. Her worn leather boots clicked against the cobblestones as she navigated through the bustling market, clutching her mother's pearl necklace, the last valuable possession. The Ashworth family hadn't yet sold to pay their mounting debts. Today, even this treasured heirloom would meet its fate at the pawnbroker's shop. "One step at a time, Catherine," she murmured, lifting her chin with practiced dignity. A lady never shows her desperation, even when her stomach growls and her slippers have holes. But fate, that mischievous architect of scandal, had other plans. As Catherine hurried past a merchant's cart loaded with imported silks, her burgundy traveling dress already mended twice caught on a protruding wooden slat. The sound that followed was unmistakably catastrophic, a long, decisive rip that seemed to echo through the entire marketplace. Her skirt tore from hem to hip, revealing not only her patched petticoat, but also the harsh reality that Lady Catherine Ashworth, daughter of the late Earl of Ashworth, was wearing stockings with more holes than threads. The market fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Merchants paused mid-transaction. Society ladies covered their mouths with gloved hands. Even the pigeons seemed to stop their cooing to witness her mortification. Catherine stood frozen, her face burning with shame, as whispers began to ripple through the crowd like wildfire. "Isn't that Lord Ashworth's daughter?" "Poor thing." "I heard they lost everything, ... How dreadfully embarrassing, ... And then, cutting through the humiliation like a sword through silk, came a voice so deep and commanding that it silenced every whisper. "Step aside." From the crowd emerged a figure that made London's bravest gentleman tremble and its most ambitious debutante swoon from afar. Alexander Blackthorne, the Duke of Ravenscroft. Tall and imposing, with midnight black hair and eyes the color of winter storms, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator. His reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning, ruthless in business, devastating in appearance, and utterly untouchable in society. They called him the Ice Duke, for no woman had ever managed to warm his heart, and no man had ever successfully challenged his authority. But on this morning, something unprecedented happened. The Duke of Ravenscroft removed his midnight blue velvet coat worth more than most families earned in a year, and without a word, draped it around Catherine's shoulders, covering her torn dress completely. The gesture was simple, swift, and utterly shocking. "Your Grace," Catherine whispered, her green eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. "I cannot accept." "You can and you will," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. A lady should never be subjected to such public scrutiny. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, hers filled with vulnerable pride, his unreadable as granite. But in that instant, something shifted in the very air between them, like the first crack in winter ice. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the Duke turned and walked away, leaving Catherine wrapped in his coat and the entire market buzzing with the most delicious scandal London had witnessed in months. That evening, alone in the crumbling library of Ashworth House, Catherine ran her fingers over the Duke's coat. The velvet was softer than anything she'd ever touched, and it still carried a scent sandalwood and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. A note had been tucked into the inner pocket. "Some tears in our lives lead to the most beautiful mending." Catherine pressed the paper to her chest. What could it mean? Was it merely kindness, or something more dangerous, something that could ruin them both? Meanwhile, across London in his imposing mansion, Alexander Blackthorne stood at his study window, staring out at the gaslit streets. For the first time in his 32 years, he couldn't concentrate on his business affairs. his investments, or his carefully constructed life. All he could see were those emerald eyes, filled with dignity despite her circumstances. All he could think about was the way she'd held her head high, even as her world crumbled around her. "Your Grace?" His secretary entered hesitantly. "The morning appointments. Cancel them," Alexander said without turning. "All of them? But, sir, the railway investments." "I said cancel them." Alexander's voice carried a note of something his secretary had never heard before distraction. "And Jenkins?" "Send flowers to Lady Catherine Ashworth." "White roses." "No card." "Sir, if I may ask." Alexander finally turned, and his expression silenced all questions. "You may not." 2 weeks later, Lady Pemberton's ball promised to be the season's most spectacular event. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors, and the cream of London society swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and scandal. Catherine stood in the corner, wearing a borrowed gown that had been fashionable 5 seasons ago. Her cousin, the vindictive Lady Penelope Fairfax, had insisted she attend not from kindness, but from cruelty. "Really, Catherine," Penelope whispered with false sweetness, "you do know how to make an entrance. Though I suppose we all remember your last public appearance." The nearby ladies tittered behind their fans, and Catherine felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, the ballroom fell silent. Alexander Blackthorne stood at the top of the grand staircase, magnificent in black evening wear that emphasized his powerful frame. His dark eyes surveyed the room with the detached interest of a man who owned half of London, which, in fact, he did. But when his gaze found Catherine in her corner, something extraordinary happened. He smiled, not the polite, practiced smile he wore for society, but a real smile that transformed his austere features and sent whispers racing through the ballroom like wildfire. And then, to the absolute shock of every person present, the Duke of Ravenscroft began walking directly toward the impoverished daughter of a disgraced earl. "Lady Catherine," he said, arriving before her with that fluid grace that made other men seem clumsy by comparison. "Would you honor me with the next waltz?" The ballroom held its collective breath. Catherine looked up at him, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "Your Grace, Surely you cannot mean—" "I never say anything I don't mean," he replied, extending his gloved hand. "The question is, do you trust me? Do you trust me?" The words would echo in Catherine's mind for days to come, but in that moment, with hundreds of eyes upon them and her reputation hanging by a thread, she placed her hand in his. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Alexander led Catherine onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was firm and sure, guiding her through the steps with such natural grace that she forgot she was wearing borrowed slippers and a dress that had seen better years. "You're staring," she said softly, though she couldn't look away from his intense dark eyes. "So is everyone else," he replied, spinning her expertly around the floor. "But they're staring at you with envy and curiosity." "I'm staring because I find you fascinating." "Fascinating?" Catherine nearly missed a step. "Your Grace, I fear you've mistaken me for someone far more interesting." "Have I?" His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "Tell me, Lady Catherine, what do you see when you look at me?" The question caught her off guard. What did she see? Power, certainly. Wealth. A man who could have any woman in London with a snap of his fingers. But there was something else, something lonely and guarded in those winter storm eyes. "I see a man who builds walls so high that he's forgotten what lies beyond them," she said honestly. Alexander's step faltered almost imperceptibly. Careful, my lady. Such honesty is dangerous in London society. So is dancing with impoverished earls' daughters, she countered. Yet here we are. Here we are indeed. His smile was enigmatic. And I find I have no desire to be anywhere else. As the music swelled around them, Catherine felt as if they were the only two people in the ballroom. The whispers, the stares, the scandal, none of it mattered when she was in his arms. But as the final notes of the waltz faded, reality crashed back like a cold wave. Thank you, Your Grace, Catherine curtsied, stepping back from his embrace. You've been most kind. Kind? Alexander's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Lady Catherine, kindness has nothing to do with what I'm feeling. Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving her standing alone on the dance floor as the ton erupted in whispers around her. The next morning, Catherine woke to find her modest breakfast room filled with flowers, dozens of bouquets from admirers. She didn't even know she had. Apparently, her lady's maid said with barely concealed excitement, "Every bachelor in London now considers you fascinating." All because the Duke of Ravenscroft danced with you. But Catherine barely heard her. She was staring at a single white rose that had arrived without a card, though she knew instinctively who had sent it. The servants were in a flutter, but Catherine felt only confusion and fear. What was the Duke's game? What could he possibly want with someone like her? Her questions were answered when a formal invitation arrived that afternoon. The Duke of Ravenscroft requests the pleasure of Lady Catherine Ashworth's company for a drive in Hyde Park, tomorrow at 4 o'clock. You cannot possibly accept, Lady Penelope declared when she heard the news. It's clearly some sort of wager or jest. Men like Ravenscroft don't court penniless girls. They ruin them. But as Catherine held the heavy cream invitation, she remembered the Duke's question from the night before. Do you trust me? Against all reason and propriety, she found that she did. Hyde Park at 4 o'clock was the fashionable hour, when all of London society paraded in their finest carriages. Alexander's equipage was magnificent, a gleaming black barouche drawn by perfectly matched gray horses, with a driver and footman in impeccable livery. Catherine had never felt more out of place, sitting beside the most eligible bachelor in England in her plain blue walking dress. But Alexander seemed utterly at ease, nodding politely to acquaintances while keeping his attention focused on her. You're very quiet, he observed as they turned down a tree-lined path. I'm wondering what people are saying about us, Catherine admitted, and why you're subjecting yourself to such speculation. Let me ask you something, Lady Catherine. Alexander's voice grew serious. What if I told you that everything you've heard about me, every whispered rumor, every dire warning, what if I told you it was all true? Catherine studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. Are you trying to frighten me away, Your Grace? Perhaps. He turned to meet her eyes. Would it work? No, she said simply. I've learned that the most dangerous thing about rumors is not whether they're true or false, but how little they reveal about a person's heart. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. My God, he said, still chuckling. No wonder London society doesn't know what to make of you. You're actually honest. It's a terrible flaw, I know, Catherine replied with a small smile. Most impractical for someone in my position. Your position? Alexander repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, what is your position, exactly? Catherine's smile faded. I think you know, Your Grace. My father died bankrupt. My mother spends her days in bed, claiming illness, but really just giving up. Our creditors circle like vultures, and soon we'll lose even our house. I have no dowry, no prospects, and apparently no sense. Since I'm sitting here with you instead of seeking employment as a governess somewhere far from London, and if those circumstances changed? Alexander asked quietly. If your position in society were to be elevated, what then? Catherine stared at him in confusion. I don't understand. Don't you? Alexander pulled the carriage to a stop beneath a large oak tree, away from the main thoroughfare. Catherine, may I call you Catherine? I want to make you an offer. Catherine's heart began to race, though whether from hope or fear, she couldn't say. What kind of offer? Alexander turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. Marriage. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marriage? Catherine whispered. But why? You barely know me, and I'm certainly not the sort of woman a duke marries. I have nothing to offer you, no fortune, no connections, no, you have everything I need. Alexander interrupted, his voice intense. You see past the surface. You speak truth when others offer only flattery. You have courage where others show only calculation. He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. And when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before London society turned me into this cold, untouchable creature everyone fears. Catherine felt tears pricking her eyes. Alexander, I cannot let you sacrifice yourself for my family's debts. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. Sacrifice? Alexander's laugh was bitter. Catherine, you don't understand. I'm the one asking for salvation. There's something you need to know about me. Alexander continued, his voice dropping lower. Something that makes this arrangement more beneficial to me than you might think. Catherine waited, her heart pounding. 5 years ago, I was engaged to Lady Margaret Worthington, a duke's daughter, everything society expected me to choose. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly bred for the role of duchess. Alexander's jaw tightened. 2 weeks before our wedding, I discovered she was having an affair with my younger brother. Catherine gasped. Alexander ... The scandal would have destroyed both our families, he continued. So I said nothing. Publicly, I ended the engagement for irreconcilable differences. Margaret married my brother, and they now live very comfortably on the generous settlement I provided. Meanwhile, I became London's most eligible and most untouchable bachelor. Because, you see, I learned that in society marriages, love is not just unnecessary, it's dangerous. But then why? Because with you, it's different. Alexander took her gloved hands in his. I'm not offering you a society marriage based on contracts and expectations. I'm offering you honesty, respect, and the chance for something real. You would have security, position, and the means to help your family. In return, you would give me something I've never had, a wife who sees me as a man rather than a title. Catherine stared at their joined hands. And love? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Love, he said finally, is something that grows between people who trust each other. The question is whether you're willing to take that chance. I need time to think, Catherine whispered. Of course. Alexander released her hands and signaled to his driver. But Catherine? Don't take too long. London society is already buzzing with speculation about us, and speculation has a way of becoming truth, whether we wish it or not. Catherine's time for quiet contemplation ended abruptly the next morning, when Lady Penelope burst into her sitting room with the latest edition of the Morning Post. Have you seen this? Penelope demanded, thrusting the paper under Catherine's nose. Look at the society column. With growing horror, Catherine read, Whispers abound regarding the Duke of R's surprising attention to a certain impoverished young lady of formerly distinguished family. Sources close to His Grace suggest an announcement may be forthcoming, though others wonder if the gentleman merely seeks to add another conquest to his considerable collection. One can only hope the lady in question understands the difference between matrimonial intention and mere entertainment. They're calling you his latest conquest, Penelope said with barely concealed glee. They're saying he's amusing himself with you before choosing a proper bride. Oh, Catherine, how could you have been so foolish? But even as mortification burned through her, Catherine remembered Alexander's question. Do you trust me? He asked me to marry him, Catherine said quietly. Penelope's eyes widened. He what? Yesterday in the park, he proposed marriage. And you said? I said I needed time to think. Penelope stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. Catherine, you must accept immediately. Do you have any idea what this means? You'd be a duchess. Our family name would be restored. I won't marry for money or position, Catherine said firmly. Not even to save our family. Then you're a bigger fool than I thought, Penelope snapped. Because after this morning's paper, your reputation is hanging by a thread. If the Duke withdraws his offer, if he ever truly made one, you'll be ruined completely. As if summoned by her words, their butler appeared in the doorway. Begging your pardon, Lady Catherine, but you have callers. Several callers. Catherine's heart sank. Who? Lady Worthington and her daughter Margaret, Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Hartwell, and double quotes the butler swallowed nervously. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. Alexander's mother had come calling. This could only mean one thing. She intended to put a stop to any romantic nonsense between her son and an impoverished earl's daughter. Show them to the drawing room, Catherine said, rising with as much dignity as she could muster. I'll be down presently. The drawing room had never seemed smaller than it did, with 5 of London's most formidable society matrons arranged in it like a tribunal. The Dowager Duchess sat in the center, a regal woman in her 60s, whose steel-gray eyes missed nothing. Lady Catherine, the Dowager said without preamble. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Catherine perched on the edge of a chair, acutely aware of her simple morning dress compared to their elegant attire. I trust you've seen this morning's paper, Lady Worthington said, holding up the Morning Post. Such unfortunate speculation about you and dear Alexander. Most unfortunate indeed. Lady Pemberton agreed, particularly given the disparity in your circumstances. Now, my dear, Mrs. Hartwell added with false kindness, we're not here to judge. We simply want to ensure you understand the situation clearly. Catherine looked to the Dowager Duchess, who had remained silent. And what situation is that? The situation, Lady Margaret Worthington said, speaking for the first time, is that Alexander has always been impulsive when it comes to charity cases. But impulse and marriage are 2 very different things. Catherine felt her temper flare. I beg your pardon? What Lady Margaret means, the Dowager Duchess finally spoke, her voice carrying absolute authority, is that my son has a tendency to rescue wounded creatures, birds with broken wings, horses others have given up on, and occasionally young women in distressed circumstances. The words hit Catherine like physical blows. I see. We're certain you do, Lady Worthington continued. Alexander is generous to a fault, and his recent attention to you clearly stems from the same noble impulse that leads him to support orphanages and fund hospitals. But surely you don't mistake charity for courtship. He proposed marriage, Catherine said quietly, lifting her chin. The women exchanged glances. My dear girl, the Dowager Duchess said not unkindly, My son has proposed marriage to many women over the years. It's his way of being gallant when he realizes his attentions have been misunderstood. Catherine felt something inside her break. I think I understand the situation perfectly now. We knew you would, Lady Pemberton said with relief. You seem a sensible girl. The best thing would be for you to graciously decline his offer and perhaps remove yourself from London for a time, until the talk dies down. Of course, Catherine whispered. How thoughtful of you all to explain things so clearly. But as the women rose to leave, the Dowager Duchess lingered behind. Lady Catherine, she said quietly when they were alone, may I offer you some advice? Haven't you done enough? Catherine asked, not bothering to hide her hurt. My son is a good man who has been deeply wounded by this world we inhabit. If you care for him at all, and I believe you do, don't let the opinions of these vultures determine your course. The dowager's eyes were suddenly kind. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to fight for it. And with that cryptic comment, she swept from the room, leaving Catherine more confused than ever. That night, Catherine sat in her father's old study, staring at a letter she'd begun writing to Alexander, formally declining his proposal. But every time she tried to finish it, the dowager's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to fight for it. A soft tapping at the French doors made her look up. A figure stood in the shadows of the garden, tall, familiar, and completely improper for a midnight visit. Alexander. Catherine opened the doors, her pulse racing. What are you doing here? I had to see you, he said, stepping into the moonlight. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his cravat loosened, his dark hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. I heard about the morning callers. About what they said to you. Then you know I must decline your offer, Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. Must you? Alexander stepped closer, and she could see the intensity in his storm-gray eyes. Or do you want to? What I want is irrelevant, Catherine replied. Your mother made it quite clear that. My mother, Alexander interrupted, spoke to you without my knowledge or permission, as did Margaret Worthington and her band of society harpies. His voice was low and dangerous. Tell me exactly what they said. Catherine recounted the conversation, watching Alexander's expression grow darker with each word. Charity case, he repeated when she finished. Wounded creatures. His laugh was bitter. My God, they really did come with claws out, didn't they? But they weren't wrong, were they? Catherine asked. Your proposal was motivated by pity, by your protective instincts. Catherine! Alexander's voice cut through her words like a blade. Look at me. She reluctantly met his eyes. I have spent my entire adult life building walls around my heart. I have been courted, pursued, flattered, and manipulated by every ambitious woman in London, and I felt nothing. Nothing. He stepped closer. But you with your honesty and your pride and your refusal to be impressed by my title, you made me feel alive again. Alexander, I'm not finished. His hands came up to frame her face. When I saw you in that market, when your skirt tore and your world seemed to crumble, do you know what I thought? Catherine shook her head mutely. I thought, here is a woman who knows how to survive with grace. When I watched you dance with me, despite knowing it would cause scandal, I thought, here is a woman with courage. And when he questioned my motives instead of simply accepting my offer, I thought, here is a woman worthy of trust. But your mother said, my mother, Alexander said firmly, is a woman who has spent her life navigating society's expectations. She assumes everyone operates by the same cold calculation she does. But she's wrong about this. Wrong about me. And wrong about you. Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. How can I be sure? Because, Alexander said, his sons gently wiping away her tears, I'm going to prove it to you. Tomorrow night at the Pemberton Ball, I'm going to make an announcement that will shock London society to its very core. What kind of announcement? Alexander smiled, that rare, real smile that transformed his entire face. The kind that declares war on anyone who dares question my choice of bride. The Pemberton Ballroom had never been more spectacular or more tense of anticipation. Word had spread through London's drawing rooms that the Duke of Ravenscroft intended to make some sort of announcement, and every member of the ton who could beg, buy, or steal an invitation had crowded into the glittering space. Catherine stood near the wall, wearing the one evening gown she owned of green silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. She felt painfully conscious of every whisper, every speculative glance, every fan that fluttered to hide gossip-hungry lips. My dear, Lady Pemberton appeared at her elbow. How brave of you to attend tonight. Given the circumstances. What circumstances? Catherine asked politely. Well, the talk, of course. About you and ... Well, Lady Pemberton's smile was razor-sharp. I do hope you won't be too disappointed when His Grace makes his announcement. Men can be so unpredictable, can't they? Before Catherine could respond, a footman struck his staff against the marble floor 3 times. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenscroft. The ballroom fell silent as Alexander appeared at the top of the grand staircase. He was magnificent in full evening dress, every inch the powerful aristocrat. But it was the look in his eyes that made Catherine's breath catch, the look of a man about to burn down the world for the woman he loved. Alexander descended the stairs slowly, his gaze sweeping the assembled crowd before settling on Catherine. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, he walked directly to her. Lady Catherine, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Would you join me? Every eye in the room fixed on Catherine as she walked across the floor to meet him. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it, but she kept her chin high and her step steady. When she reached him, Alexander took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles that sent whispers racing through the crowd like wildfire. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander said, his voice ringing with authority. I have an announcement to make. The ballroom was so quiet that Catherine could hear the tick of the great clock in the corner. It has come to my attention, Alexander continued, that there has been considerable speculation about my intentions toward Lady Catherine Ashworth. Allow me to clarify the situation once and for all. Catherine felt her knees go weak. This was it, the moment when he would graciously withdraw his offer and she would be publicly humiliated. Lady Catherine, Alexander said, turning to face her fully, has agreed to become my wife. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, exclamations, and the flutter of 100 fans created a chaos of sound. But Catherine heard none of it, because Alexander was speaking directly to her now, his voice low and intimate despite the public setting. I know this comes as a surprise, he said, his eyes never leaving hers, but I find myself quite desperately in love with you, and I simply couldn't wait another moment to make you mine. Alexander, Catherine whispered, tears of joy now streaming down her face. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied. Then, to the absolute scandal and delight of the assembled crowd, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, passionately, and completely without regard for propriety. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom was in complete uproar. Some guests were applauding, others were fanning themselves in shock, and Lady Pemberton looked as if she might faint. But Catherine only had eyes for Alexander. I love you too, she whispered against his lips, Good, he replied with that devastating smile. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that fairy tales can come true, even for wounded creatures like us. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through London society. By morning, every newspaper in the city carried the story, and the Ashworth house was besieged by curious callers. But Catherine barely noticed the fuss. She was floating on a cloud of happiness, marveling at how quickly her world had transformed. She was examining wedding fabrics with her suddenly energetic mother when Alexander arrived, looking every inch the devoted fiancé. "Good morning, darling," he said, kissing her hand with such obvious affection that her mother actually giggled, a sound Catherine hadn't heard in years. "Your Grace," Catherine's mother said, "I cannot thank you enough for the honor you do our family." "On the contrary, Lady Ashworth," Alexander replied gallantly, "the honor is entirely mine. Your daughter has agreed to save me from a lifetime of lonely cynicism. I am the one who should be grateful." After her mother excused herself to see about the wedding breakfast arrangements, Alexander pulled Catherine into his arms. "No regrets?" he asked, studying her face intently. "None," Catherine assured him. "Though I confess I'm still amazed this is real." "Believe it," Alexander murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Because in 3 weeks you'll be the Duchess of Ravenscroft, and then you'll never escape me." 3 weeks? Catherine pulled back in surprise. "Isn't that rather fast?" Alexander's eyes gleamed with mischief. "My dear future wife, I have waited 32 years to find love. I'm not inclined to wait much longer to claim it." 3 weeks later, St. George's, Hanover Square was packed to capacity with the cream of London society, all eager to witness the wedding of the decade. Catherine stood in the bride's chamber, staring at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, designed by London's most exclusive modiste and paid for by her devoted groom. Pearls gleamed at her throat, a wedding gift from the Dowager Duchess, who had proven to be Catherine's most unexpected ally in the wedding preparations. "You look like a princess," breathed her maid. "I feel like an imposter," Catherine admitted. "What if I disappoint him? What if I can never truly belong in his world?" "My dear," came a familiar voice from the doorway. The Dowager Duchess entered, magnificent in deep blue silk. "May I have a moment alone with the bride?" When they were alone, the Dowager took Catherine's hands in hers. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "When I came to see you with those other women, I was testing you. I wanted to see if you would run when challenged, if you would crumble under pressure." Catherine stared at her in shock. "That was a test?" "The worst kind of test, I'm afraid. But you see, my dear, Alexander has been hurt badly by this world. I needed to know that you had the strength to stand beside him, not just when times are good, but when they're difficult." The Dowager smiled. "You passed with flying colors, but you told them to tell me it was charity." "I told them no such thing. Margaret Worthington said those things because she's bitter about losing Alexander to my younger son. The others followed her lead because they're sheep." The Dowager's expression grew fierce. "But you, my dear, you showed them exactly the kind of steel that makes a true duchess." Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you. No, my dear. Thank you for giving my son back his heart." The ceremony was everything Catherine had never dared to dream. As she walked down the aisle on her cousin's arm, her father's brother having agreed to give her away, she saw only Alexander waiting for her at the altar. He looked magnificent in his formal attire, but it was the expression on his face that took her breath away. Pure, undiluted love shone in his storm gray eyes, Love so obvious that even the gossips in the pews fell silent. When she reached him, Alexander took her hand and whispered, "You're beautiful. So are you," she whispered back, making him smile that real, transformative smile she'd fallen in love with. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred promises. But when the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was so tender, so full of promise, that Catherine felt her heart might burst from happiness. As they walked back down the aisle as the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft, Catherine caught sight of Lady Penelope in the crowd, looking as if she'd swallowed something unpleasant. Beside her, Margaret Worthington wore a similar expression. But Catherine felt only pity for them. They would never understand that true love wasn't about titles or fortunes. It was about finding someone who saw your soul and loved it completely. Ravenscroft Manor, spring 1836. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room as Catherine, now the Duchess of Ravenscroft, sat reading correspondence while her husband reviewed estate papers. Marriage had brought her luxuries she'd never imagined: silk gowns, jewels, servants to attend her every need. But the greatest luxury was the simple pleasure of sharing breakfast with the man she loved. "The orphanage committee is requesting another donation," she said, looking up from a letter. "And the Ladies' Charitable Society wants me to sponsor their spring ball." Alexander glanced up from his papers, his eyes warm with affection. "My Duchess, the philanthropist? London society never saw that coming, did they?" "Neither did I," Catherine admitted with a laugh. "A year ago, I was worried about paying for bread. Now I'm worried about how to spend our fortune on worthy causes." "Our fortune," Alexander repeated, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I love hearing you say that. Even though I've already spent more on charity this month than my family lived on for an entire year." "Especially because of that," Alexander brought her hand to his lips. "You've taught me something important, darling. Money is only powerful when it's used to help others." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their butler, bearing a silver tray laden with invitations. "Your Graces," he announced. "The Morning Post." Catherine sorted through the pile, noting invitations to balls, garden parties, and dinner parties from hostesses who had once scorned her. Amazing how a duchess's title could transform enemies into eager friends. "Oh," she exclaimed, stopping at one particular invitation. "Alexander, look at this." She held up an elegant card with gilt edges. "Lady Margaret Worthington requests the pleasure of our company at a dinner party next week." Alexander's expression darkened. "You're not seriously considering accepting?" "Actually, I am." Catherine's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I think it's time I had a proper conversation with your former fiancé. Catherine," Alexander warned, "Margaret can be vindictive when she chooses." "So can I," Catherine replied serenely. "But I prefer to be strategically kind instead." "It's much more devastating." 1 week later, Lady Margaret Worthington's dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, and the guest list represented the pinnacle of London society. Catherine entered on Alexander's arm, resplendent in midnight blue silk adorned with the Ravenscroft diamonds. She noticed immediately that Margaret had seated her directly across from herself, a deliberate choice designed to create maximum awkwardness. "Your Grace," Margaret said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "how lovely you look." "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "Indeed it does," Catherine replied warmly. "I'm the most fortunate woman in London." "How wonderful," Margaret continued, her voice sweetly venomous, "that dear Alexander found someone so ... appreciative of his generous nature." The other guests fell silent, sensing the undercurrents of tension. Alexander's jaw tightened, but Catherine placed a calming hand on his arm. "Oh, but Lady Margaret," Catherine said with perfect innocence. Surely you understand that true love has nothing to do with generosity or charity. When two hearts recognize each other, worldly circumstances become quite irrelevant. Margaret's smile faltered slightly. How about romantic, isn't it? Catherine continued, her voice gentle but her eyes steel. I imagine it must be difficult for someone who married for practical reasons to understand the joy of marrying for love. A collective intake of breath went around the table. Everyone knew that. Margaret's marriage to Alexander's younger brother had been arranged to salvage her reputation after her affair was discovered. Some of us, Margaret replied coldly, prefer the security of practical arrangements to the uncertainty of romance. How sad, Catherine said with genuine pity. But then again, not everyone is blessed to find their perfect match. Some people must settle for what's available. Alexander's hand found Catherine's under the table, squeezing gently in admiration. His wife was dismantling Margaret with surgical precision, all while maintaining perfect manners. Tell me, Lady Margaret, Catherine continued, how is your husband? I so rarely see him in society these days. It was a masterful stroke. Everyone knew that Margaret's husband had taken to drinking heavily and avoiding London society entirely. Well, Margaret managed. I'm so glad. Alexander and I were just saying how important it is for married couples to spend time together. We're so devoted to each other that we can hardly bear to be apart. Catherine smiled brilliantly. But I suppose that's the difference between marriages born of love and those born of other circumstances. The coup de grace was delivered so sweetly that it took a moment for its full impact to register. When it did, Margaret's face went white, then red. If you'll excuse me, Margaret said stiffly, rising from her chair. I need to check on the next course. She fled the dining room, and Catherine turned back to her soup as if nothing had happened. Your Grace, the gentleman beside her whispered admiringly. That was masterfully done. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Catherine replied with perfect innocence. I was simply making conversation. Later that evening, as they rode home in their carriage, Alexander pulled Catherine onto his lap. Remind me never to cross you, he said, pressing kisses along her neck. You absolutely destroyed Margaret tonight, did I? Catherine asked with feigned innocence. I thought I was being quite charitable. Charitable like a lioness is charitable to a gazelle, Alexander murmured against her ear. My God, I've never been more aroused by my wife's conversational skills, Catherine laughed, threading her fingers through his hair. Alexander, it's true. Watching you defend our marriage with such elegant ruthlessness. You magnificent, dangerous woman. I learned from the best, Catherine said, cupping his face in her hands. You've taught me that sometimes love requires us to fight for it, and you've taught me that the fight is always worth it. Alexander replied, capturing her lips in a kiss that made her forget they were in a moving carriage. When they finally broke apart, Catherine rested her head against his shoulder. Alexander, there's something I need to tell you. Something wonderful. Something in her tone made him pull back to look at her face. What is it? Catherine's smile was radiant. We're going to have a baby. Alexander went very still. A baby? A baby? Catherine confirmed. I saw the physician this morning. We'll be parents by Christmas. For a moment, Alexander couldn't speak. Then he was kissing her again, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of precious crystal. My God, Catherine? A baby? Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, suddenly uncertain. Happy? Alexander's laugh was pure joy. Darling, I'm terrified, overjoyed, amazed, and completely overwhelmed. So, yes, I suppose happy covers it? Good, Catherine said, settling back into his arms. Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our adventures. 6 months later, Catherine stood in what would soon be the nursery, one hand resting on her now prominent belly as she directed the hanging of delicate blue and pink wallpaper. A little to the left, she instructed the workmen. Perfect. You know, Alexander said from the doorway, we could have hired a decorator. Where's the fun in that? Catherine turned to smile at her husband, noting how his eyes immediately went to her rounded figure with that look of wonder and protectiveness that never failed to make her heart flutter. How are you feeling today? He asked, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands coming to rest over hers on her belly. Like I'm carrying a very active little duke or duchess, Catherine replied, leaning back against his chest. I swear this child is already trying to redesign the architecture from the inside, as if in response to her words. The baby kicked vigorously, making both parents laugh. Strong like his mother, Alexander murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. His? Catherine raised an eyebrow. What if it's a her? Then she'd be brilliant and beautiful and completely unstoppable, just like her mother. And if it's a boy? Then he'll be stubborn and protective and utterly devoted to the women in his life, just like his father. Catherine turned in his arms, studying his face. Are you nervous about becoming a father? Terrified? Alexander admitted honestly. What if I don't know how to love a child properly? What if I'm too cold, too distant, like my own father was? Alexander, Catherine's voice was firm. Look at me. He met her eyes. You are nothing like your father. You're kind, generous, protective, and capable of incredible love. This baby is already so lucky to have you. How can you be so certain? Because, Catherine said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly, I've seen your heart, and it's beautiful. Word of the future heir's expected arrival sent London society into a frenzy of excitement. Suddenly, Catherine found herself the center of attention in a way that was both gratifying and overwhelming. Your Grace, gushed Lady Pemberton at a tea party, you simply must tell us your secrets. You look absolutely radiant. Fresh air and happiness, Catherine replied diplomatically, though she was thinking that love and financial security probably didn't hurt either. And the Duke must be beside himself with joy, added Mrs. Hartwell. Men, do you so love the prospect of sons and heirs? Alexander is thrilled, Catherine confirmed, though he's assured me he'll be equally delighted with a daughter. The ladies exchanged glances. This was not the typical aristocratic response. Most peers desperately wanted sons to inherit their titles. How? Progressive, Lady Pemberton managed. Alexander is a progressive man in many ways, Catherine said with a smile that dared anyone to criticize her husband. It's one of the things I love most about him. Later, as Catherine was leaving the party, she was approached by a young woman she didn't recognize. Pretty, well-dressed, but with an anxious expression. Your Grace, the woman said nervously, might I have a word? Of course, Catherine replied kindly. Though I'm afraid I don't believe we've been introduced. Miss Sarah Winters, the woman said with a curtsy. I'm in a situation rather similar to the one you were in last year. Catherine's eyebrows rose. Oh, my father died heavily in debt, and I've been trying to find employment as a governess. But ... Miss Winters's voice trailed off. I wondered if you might have any advice. Catherine studied the young woman's face, seeing her own fears and desperation reflected there. Miss Winters, she said gently, Would you like to come to tea tomorrow? I think we have quite a bit to discuss. The next afternoon, Catherine received Miss Winters in her private sitting room. Over delicate sandwiches and excellent tea, she listened to a story that was heartbreakingly familiar. The creditors have given us until the end of the month, Sarah concluded. After that, my mother and I will be turned out with nothing. And you have no other family? No one who could help? None who acknowledge us, Sarah said bitterly. It's amazing how quickly one's relations disappear when there's no money left to borrow. Catherine nodded sympathetically. I understand completely. Tell me, Miss Winters, what are your accomplishments? I speak French and Italian fluently. I play the pianoforte tolerably well, and I've been told I have a way with children. Excellent. How would you feel about becoming companion to a duchess who finds herself in need of assistance during her confinement? Sarah's eyes widened. Your Grace, you cannot mean... I absolutely do. The position comes with comfortable quarters, an excellent salary, and the opportunity to help me with the various charitable endeavors I've taken on since my marriage. But why? Sarah whispered. You don't even know me, because, Catherine said firmly, someone once showed me unexpected kindness when I needed it most. And because I believe that those who have been blessed with good fortune have a responsibility to help others find theirs, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Catherine encouraged. And then help me plan a ball. A ball? A charity ball, Catherine clarified, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I've decided it's time. London society put their money where their mouths are regarding their concern for the less fortunate. We're going to make charitable giving fashionable. December 24th, 1836. Catherine woke on Christmas Eve with a familiar ache in her back that had been plaguing her for days. But as she tried to shift to a more comfortable position, a sharp pain seized her that was unlike anything she'd felt before. Alexander, she gasped, reaching for her husband. He was awake instantly, alert and concerned. What is it? What's wrong? Another pain gripped her, stronger this time, and Catherine realized with a mixture of excitement and terror that their baby had decided to make an early Christmas appearance. I think it's time, she whispered. Alexander went white. Time? But the doctor said you had another week. Tell that to your child, Catherine managed, trying to smile despite the pain. Apparently, he or she is as impatient as you are. What followed was a flurry of activity as Alexander summoned the doctor, the midwife, and half the household staff. Catherine was grateful for Sarah Winters' calm presence as she helped her prepare for labor. You can do this, Your Grace, Sarah said encouragingly. Think of it as the most important ball you'll ever attend. You just need to get through it one step at a time. Despite her pain, Catherine laughed. That's either the most absurd or most helpful comparison anyone's ever made. Hours later, as London celebrated Christmas morning, Alexander paced the corridor outside their bedroom like a caged panther. The Dowager Duchess had arrived and was attempting to calm him, but he was beyond consolation. What if something goes wrong? He demanded for the 100th time. What if I lose her? What if, Alexander, his mother said firmly, you're going to wear a hole in the carpet. Catherine is strong, the doctor is excellent, and women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my woman. Not my baby. Before the Dowager could respond, a new sound filled the house, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Alexander went completely still. Moments later, the doctor emerged, beaming. Your Grace, congratulations. You have a daughter. A daughter? Alexander repeated wonderingly. And Catherine? Your wife is tired but well. She's asking for you. Alexander burst through the bedroom door to find Catherine propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in white blankets. Her hair was damp with perspiration, her face pale from exhaustion, but her smile was radiant. "Alexander," she said softly, "come meet your daughter." With trembling hands, Alexander took the baby, staring down at the tiny face with wonder. She had Catherine's delicate features but his dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were the same storm gray as his own. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Lady Isabella Rose Blackthorne," Catherine announced. "I thought she should have a strong name to match her strong entrance into the world." "Isabella?" Alexander repeated, then looked at Catherine with tears in his eyes. "My God, Catherine, look what we've done. Look what we've created. The best Christmas present ever." Catherine agreed, as her daughter yawned and settled more comfortably in her father's arms. 1 month later, Catherine stood at the window of the nursery, holding Isabella while watching Alexander in the garden below. He was directing the installation of a swing set, explaining to the bemused gardener that it was never too early to prepare for a child's entertainment needs. "Your father," Catherine murmured to this baby, "is completely besotted with you. He's already planning your debut ball, and you're not even 2 months old." Isabella gurgled in response, as if agreeing that her father's enthusiasm was rather excessive but endearing. "Your Grace?" Sarah Winters appeared in the doorway. "The morning callers have arrived," Catherine sighed. Since Isabella's birth, their drawing room had been a constant parade of society ladies eager to coo over the newest member of London's aristocracy. "Who is it today?" "Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Hartwell, and ... double quotes. Lady Margaret Worthington." Catherine's eyebrows rose. Margaret hadn't called since the disastrous dinner party. "How interesting." "Very well, I'll be down in a moment." When Catherine entered the drawing room carrying Isabella, she noted that Margaret looked genuinely nervous, a far cry from her usual confident demeanor. "Your Grace," Margaret said, rising quickly. "Thank you for receiving me." "Of course," Catherine replied graciously, settling into a chair with the baby. "How lovely to see you." The other ladies cooed over Isabella, but Catherine noticed that Margaret hung back, her expression strangely wistful. "She's beautiful," Margaret said quietly when the others had finished their admiration. "Thank you," Catherine replied, then made a decision that surprised even herself. "Would you like to hold her?" Margaret's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded and carefully took the baby. For a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked, and Catherine saw something vulnerable and deeply sad. "I came to apologize," Margaret said suddenly, still looking down at Isabella. "For my behavior at the dinner party. For everything, really." The other ladies fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. "That's very kind of you," Catherine replied gently. "I was jealous," Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "You had everything I thought I wanted, but was too foolish to value when I had the chance. Alexander's love, his respect, his devotion. I threw it all away for a momentary passion, and I've regretted it every day since." Catherine felt a wave of pity for the woman who had once seemed like such a threat. "We all make choices, Lady Margaret. What matters is what we do with the consequences." Margaret looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You're very gracious, Your Grace. Much more so than I deserve. Grace," Catherine said with a small smile, "is something we give to each other, not something we earn." After the ladies left, Alexander found Catherine in the nursery, feeding Isabella. "Sarah told me about Margaret's visit," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "How do you feel about her apology?" "Sad, mostly," Catherine replied. She's trapped in a marriage with no love, watching everyone else live the life she could have had. It's a terrible punishment for a moment of weakness. You're very forgiving. I can afford to be generous, Catherine said, looking up at her husband. I have everything she lost, and more than she could ever have given me. Alexandra leaned over to kiss her forehead. I love you, Catherine Blackthorne. Have I mentioned that recently? Only every day, Catherine replied with a smile. But I don't mind hearing it again. 5 years later, the grounds of Ravenscroft Manor were alive with laughter and chaos as the annual spring garden party was in full swing. Catherine, now 30 and even more beautiful than she'd been as a young bride, watched from the terrace as Alexander chased 5-year-old Isabella through the maze, both of them shrieking with laughter. "Mama!" called a voice from behind her. 3-year-old James, dark-haired and serious like his father, but with Catherine's green eyes, tugged at her skirt. "Bella won't share the swing." "Perhaps you could ask nicely," Catherine suggested, scooping up her son. "Remember what we discussed about using words before tattling?" James considered this gravely. "Papa says ladies should always get first turn." "Papa is very wise about ladies," Catherine agreed, noting how Alexander's lessons in chivalry were already taking root in their son. "Your Grace." Sarah Winters, now Mrs. Sarah Pemberton, after marrying the vicar Catherine, had introduced her to approach with her own infant daughter in her arms. "The Ladies' Auxiliary would like to know if you'll speak at next month's charity luncheon." "Of course," Catherine replied. "What's the cause this time?" "Education for orphan girls." "We've raised enough money to establish a proper school." Catherine smiled, remembering her own precarious situation just 6 years earlier. "Perfect." I know exactly what to say. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself reflecting on the curious turns life had taken. The terrified, impoverished girl who had torn her skirt in Covent Garden had become one of London's most influential duchesses. More importantly, she'd found love, purpose, and the kind of happiness she'd never dared to dream of. "Penny for your thoughts?" Alexander appeared beside her, slightly out of breath from chasing children and considerably disheveled. "Just thinking about how much has changed since that day in the market," Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace. "Regrets?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Only one," Catherine said with a mischievous smile. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I wish I could go back and tell that terrified girl in the torn dress that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the doorways to our greatest." "Joyce!" Alexander turned her in his arms, his expression tender. "She wouldn't have believed you." "Probably not," Catherine agreed. "But she would have hoped." "And hope, as it turns out, is sometimes all we need." "That," Alexander said, leaning down to kiss his wife, "and a duke who's fool enough to fall in love with a woman who challenges him at every turn. The very best kind of fool," Catherine murmured against his lips. As their children's laughter rang across the gardens and their guests celebrated around them, Catherine thought about all the torn skirts and broken dreams that had led to this perfect moment. Sometimes, she reflected, the most beautiful love stories began with the most unlikely disasters. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales really did come true even for impoverished earls. Daughters who dared to trust dukes with dark reputations and hearts of gold. Dear reader, as we close this tale of torn silk and mended hearts, let us remember that true love often arrives disguised as scandal, wrapped in circumstances that make society whisper and doubt. Catherine and Alexander's story reminds us that the most profound connections are forged not in perfection, but in vulnerability, in those moments when our carefully constructed facades tear away, revealing the authentic souls beneath. In our own lives, we may not encounter dukes in London markets, but we all face moments when our metaphorical skirts tear, when we're exposed and afraid, when the world seems ready to judge us for our imperfections. It's in these moments that we discover who truly sees us, who offers their coat without expecting anything in return, who finds beauty in our brokenness. Love, real love, isn't about perfect circumstances or matching social standings. It's about finding someone who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself. Someone who fights for you when the world suggests you're not worth fighting for. Someone who transforms your greatest shame into your most treasured memory. May you find your own Alexander, dear reader, someone who looks past the surface to the extraordinary person within. And may you have the courage, like Catherine, to trust love when it comes calling, even if it arrives at the most unexpected moment in the most scandalous way. Thank you for joining me in this journey through Regency London, where love conquered scandal and hearts triumphed over circumstances. If this tale of Catherine and Alexander's romance swept you away, please show your support by subscribing to our channel, giving this video a thumbs up, and sharing it with fellow romance lovers who believe in the power of true love. Leave a comment below telling me which moment made your heart flutter most. Was it their first dance, the midnight garden confession, or perhaps little Isabella's Christmas arrival? Your engagement helps me create more stories that celebrate love in all its beautiful, complicated, wonderful forms. Until our next romantic adventure together, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary disasters. Keep believing in fairy tales.